All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Kissinger, incoming president. It's really exciting to have had such a successful event here. We're so thankful that all of you have come, and we're looking forward to a real exciting year as well. So I'm looking forward to being the president, following in the wonderful footsteps of our leader, Joyce Miller Evans. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce someone who I am frankly very amazed we have right here in the Cincinnati area. He's a Cincinnati native, I believe, even possibly born in one of our very own hospitals here in Cincinnati. It's likely that he was born at one of them. And he is an author, he's a lecturer, an inspirational speaker. And what a great way to wrap up our day with this talk by Todd Henry. Please put your hands together for Todd Henry.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. I know that there are no more terrible, maybe there's only one phrase more terrifying than please stick around for a motivational speaker. So thank you for indulging in that. It is good to be with you. And it's great to be able to say hello to my fellow Ohioans as well, which I don't often get to do. So I spent the last several years of my life studying creativity, but studying a very specific kind of creativity. That's creativity in the marketplace. Creativity among those who have to go to work every day and turn their thoughts into value, who have to solve problems. How many of you have to solve problems on a daily basis as a function of your job? Okay, how many of you solve other people's problems every day? Okay, one final question. How many of you had a specific person in mind when I asked that last question? Yeah, okay, right? That's what we do. As creative professionals, we solve problems. We have to go to work, we have to turn our thoughts into value on a daily basis. But with that comes a unique set of pressures, a unique set of circumstances, a confrontation against uncertainty on a daily basis, because there's never a guaranteed result on the other side of our effort. And so what I've done, what my company's done for the last several years, is we've worked with teams of people who have to solve problems, who have to generate new ideas, new ways of thinking about their work on a daily basis, and help them develop some systems to do that. Now, I know that when we talk about subjects like creativity and passion for our work, I know that for some of us, our eyeballs roll to the back of our head and we get the drool coming down the side of our chin, right? Because these are, we can call them the more ineffable subjects of the work that we do. Some of you call them the touchy-feely part of the work that we do. And so just to let you know, I know we have a lot of analytical minds here. I've been speaking to a lot of hospital groups of late, and I know, and a lot of healthcare groups, and I know that there are a lot of analytical minds in the room. So I want to point you to the universally recognized MSOW spectrum to let you know exactly how touchy-feely we're going to get today, because most of us know what this is. We're all professionals, I know. But in case you don't know, I'm embarrassed you, of course, the Mr. Spock Oprah Winfrey spectrum. And we're going to fall somewhere right about there on the touchy-feely scale, okay? So no worries, not all the way touchy-feely. But, we are going to have to talk about some things that might make some of us a little bit less than comfortable when we talk about passion and creativity in our work. Also, if you go to toddhenry.com/CSO, that's Central South Ohio, you can download my slides from today. A conversation I had with a couple of my friends, the Global Creative Chief at 20th Century Fox, and a couple of other people about collaboration in the workplace, and also a workbook for my new book, which is called Die. All right, let's dive in. So, as was mentioned, my family and I are from Cincinnati, and a couple of years ago we made a trip up to Lake Erie for the 4th of July. No whoops. Okay, I can take it. We made a trip up to Lake Erie for the 4th of July, and we were going to head down to the fireworks to see the fireworks. And as we started packing up to take the kids, our 3 children, down to the fireworks, our middle child, Owen, started protesting. Screaming, flooding over, I'm not going to go. You can't make me go to the fireworks. And of course, like a good dad, I said, shut up, get in the wagon. So we put him in the wagon. We start walking down to the lake. So we get closer and closer to the lake. Owen starts protesting again. He jumps out of the wagon. He starts running the opposite direction. Okay, so now I'm chasing my wailing 6-year-old son through the streets of town. This looks really good, by the way. I finally catch up with him. I put my arms on his shoulders. I say, Owen, son, it's okay. The fireworks aren't going to fall on you. It's perfectly safe. They're not going to fall on you. He looked at me with this inquisitive look and he said, Dad, I'm not worried they're going to fall on me. Duh. I said, well, what's going on? I don't understand. He said, Dad, fireworks make my feet fuzzy. Okay, first I turned to my wife and said, what have you been feeding my child? Right? What do you mean they make your feet fuzzy? He said, yeah, like at Disney World. Okay, I solve creative problems for a living. This is what I do, right? So now I've got 4 disparate bits of data. I've got wailing child, I've got fuzzy feet, I've got fireworks, and now, introduced into the mix, I've got Disney World. So I'm crunching in my brain trying to figure out what the heck is this 6-year-old kid talking about? Fuzzy feet, fireworks. So I'm crunching these things in my brain, trying to figure out what is the connective tissue. And I suddenly remember that the last time Owen saw fireworks was on a family trip to Disney World. Very good. Good. Yeah. Disney World. That's great. And so I started replaying the scene in my head from that day at Disney. I started thinking, okay, what is going on? So I'm remembering that day was very hot and I spent most of the day riding around on my shoulders. So as I'm replaying the scene, I remember we walked around the park for a couple of hours with Owen on my shoulders. At one point, we walked in front of Cinderella's castle. This is the climactic moment. This is when the fireworks go off over Cinderella's castle. And it suddenly occurred to me what was going on in this 6-year-old mind. What happens when you spend a couple of hours riding around on someone's shoulders? What happens to your legs? They fall asleep. You get the pins and needles thing going on. Something that hadn't occurred to him until his fireworks-induced startle. So my son walked around for a year with the assumption that fireworks make his legs immobile. Okay? So we had a little talk about causation and correlation. I don't think he got it. But I started thinking shortly thereafter about how often I do a similar thing in my work. And how often the companies that I work with do a similar thing in their work. How often conversations I have on the boardroom level with organizations are infused with these kinds of causal assumptions. See, because we experience something, let's call it success. And because we are biologically hardwired to replicate the circumstances that led to that success, we go back to the same wells over and over and over again. We go back to the same processes over and over and over again, the same systems over and over and over again. And sometimes that can be successful in the short run, but then when the context for our work changes, those causal assumptions are no longer valid. And so our efforts become ineffective. And going back to the same systems, which become habits, which become assumptions, which become ruts, is not the way that we get to the really valuable ideas that we need if we want to continue to innovate, continue to create value on behalf of the people we serve. Friends, you are in an industry that we could probably call the apex of the healthcare industry right now. This is probably the linchpin. This is the thing that we have got to figure out if we're going to be able to move forward in a meaningful way. It's serving the people for which we stand in the gap. And we're not going to get there by living with entrenched assumptions, causal or otherwise. So in our work, I can't tell you about the work that you do, but in the course of doing our work, in the course of confronting uncertainty, we have to be careful to make sure that we're structuring our life and our thought processes intentionally, so we're bringing the best of who we are to what we do. We're not living with those causal assumptions. We're not living in a place of entrenchment in terms of how we see our work. When this happens over time, we can easily slip into a place of mediocrity. Now, this word mediocrity is interesting to me because I don't think it means what a lot of us think it means. In the original context, if you pull the word mediocrity, if you parse it into its constituent parts, it comes from 2 words: medius, meaning middle, and ocris, meaning rugged mountain. So to be mediocre literally means to stop halfway up a rugged mountain. It means to stop halfway to your objective. Get halfway there and say, yeah, close enough. I'm going to settle in. I'm going to kick my heels up. And I believe that one of the reasons this happens to creative professionals, again, to those who hear their thoughts on value, the big reason, I believe, is because on a daily basis, we have to confront uncertainty. And that uncertainty wears us down. Because again, there's no guaranteed result on the other side of that uncertainty, that problem solving, but we're going to see results. And so we have to have systems to help us venture into those uncomfortable places where value resides, to prevent us from becoming entrenched and living with assumptions that are limiting us. When we become entrenched, we often fail to realize that everything we are doing, everything you and I are doing on a daily basis, is building a delta. It's building a change that will exist at the end of our life because we suck air, right? We can call it our body of work. It's the body of work that we're building individually and collectively as an organization. And we're doing it every day, whether willingly, whether purposefully or not. We're building a body of work. We're building a delta that will exist. And what we fail to realize when we get stuck in a place of mediocrity is that delta, which seems very imposing often from a distance, when we look at the big problem, it's a big problem that we're all trying to solve in this room. When we look at that big problem, we often become paralyzed because we fail to realize that that big delta is actually comprised of a lot of little deltas. Little daily choices about how we bring ourselves to the work that we do. Or as my friend Gretchen Rubin likes to say, what you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while. It's the small disciplines, the micro realignments that we do individually and as a company that matter more than the big initiatives, more than the big efforts that we make. There are 4 primary resources that we spend in our effort to do great work, to build that delta. With some people, your fate determines your fate, not to be too cutesy, right? Your fate determines your fate. Your focus, how you define the problems you're trying to solve. It's easy to lack a clear definition of our work, to have a lack of clear definition around the edges or the outcomes we're committed to. We have a finite amount of attention to spend on solving problems. Have you defined the problems you're trying to solve clearly? How are you spending your finite attention? Your assets, these are your physical resources. These are your relational resources. This is anything you have to spend on behalf of an outcome. Even Warren Buffett has finite resources to spend on behalf of an outcome. Your time. Time is the currency of productivity. So at the end of the day, where we choose to spend our finite time with 168 hours we have a week will ultimately, in large part, determine the trajectory of our life and our work. And then the final element is your energy. And we often neglect this element because we think, well, energy is renewable. I go to sleep and I wake up and I'm refreshed. But over time, if we're not careful about how we manage our energy or the emotional labor that we bring to our work, if we're not careful about pruning priorities and trimming our focus and spending our time effectively, then it doesn't matter how hard we work, we're going to see diminishing returns on our effort. And as we spend those 4 resources, we engage in 3 kinds of work. We spend focus, assets, time, and energy on primarily 3 kinds of work. And these 3 kinds of work comprise the body of work that we build, all of us. The first kind is kind of intuitive, right? It's mapping, it's planning, it's strategizing. We plan what we're going to do. We're all professionals, and we understand the importance of planning. The second kind of work is making. And this is actually executing the things that you plan. Now, when most of us think of work, this is what we think of. We think of, I plan and I do, I plan and I do. And that's primarily what we think of in terms of our sphere of engagement on a daily basis. But there's a third kind of work that especially productive people do, and especially contributive people do. People who build exponential amounts of value in their life through their work. There's another kind of work that they do that we often neglect. And it's what I call meshing. Meshing is all of the work between the work. It's the things that we do to make sure that we're aligning our focus effectively. It's the things we do to develop our skill set, to sharpen ourselves intellectually, to prepare ourselves not just for the opportunities in front of us, but to prepare ourselves to be able to spot the opportunities coming weeks, months, years down the road. Now, when we neglect one or more of these kinds of work, we can fall into a couple of different kinds of profiles. So when you map and you make, you're very good at planning and doing, but you neglect meshing. You ignore the work between the work. I call these people drivers. And there are a lot of drivers in the workforce, and we tend to celebrate drivers. These are the get-it-done people, and they will get it done in short spurts. And what I have seen through my research is that people who tend toward being a driver tend to be very productive in short spurts, and then they go through these cycles of crash and burn. And then they re-engage, and then they go through a cycle of crash and burn because they're not doing all of the meshing, the work between the work, to keep themselves aligned, to make sure that they're spending their focus, assets, time, and energy in a contributive manner. When we are good at meshing, meaning we're doing the work between the work, and we're good at making, but we lack the conviction of a strategic plan, we're not mapping effectively. These are the people I call drifters. These are the people who leave a wake of half-finished products or projects in their path, right? Because they lack the conviction of a strategic plan. And this obviously isn't going to work very well for us because we need, obviously if we're trying to solve a complex problem, we have to be attached to a strategic plan. We have to be living by the conviction of a strategic plan. And then of course, if you're good at meshing and you're good at planning, you have lots of big plans for what you want to do and you're good at the work between the work, but you never actually get stuff done. These are people that I call dreamers. And we see a lot of these in Silicon Valley. This is what I hear from Silicon Valley executives. These are idea people. That's what we call them out there, right? They have lots of ideas, but they never actually get around to doing anything. Now, what we want to do, and what I'm going to spend the rest of our time together today talking about, is we want to be the 4th kind of profile, which is what I call the developer. The developer is the person or the organization who approaches their work with a strategic plan with the grit necessary to get it done, but also they're stepping back on a regular basis and establishing context for their work. They're making sure that they're actually spending their focus, assets, time, and energy in meaningful ways. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about, is what are some of the places we need to be concentrating on to make sure that happens. Now, the guiding principle is mediocrity doesn't just happen. It's chosen over time. No one wakes up in the morning thinking, I can't wait to crank out a steaming pile of crap today. Nobody does that, right? But it happens. It happens in slow ways, in small ways over time, through little choices that we make about where we put our focus, our assets, our time, and our energy. So the guiding principle, or the countermanding principle here, is that brilliance demands discipline. And I think I would hear a collective, well, yeah, from the room. We all know that brilliant work demands discipline, and we see that. The people who produce brilliant work tend to be very disciplined people. But I would amend this and say it requires a very special kind of discipline. Not just any kind of discipline, not just the kind of discipline that a driver has, where they'll get it done in short spurts, but it demands, I believe, bravery. It demands bravery to engage in ways that sometimes might seem countercultural, to engage in ways that seem very inefficient in the moment, but that provide effectiveness over the long term. The seeds of tomorrow's brilliance are planted in the soil of today's activity. So what we do today, the little delta that we build today, ultimately flows up into that big delta that we're trying to achieve through our life and our work. So we have to have bravery. What kind of bravery? Bravery to countermand what I call the seven deadly sins of mediocrity. These are 7 areas where, through my work with hundreds of companies over dozens of industries over the course of many years, these are the places that I find that individuals who are creative professionals and teams of people, especially clusters within these organizations, tend to fall down. And the problem with these 7 deadly sins is that they often sneak into our lives, into our organizations, unseen, unnoticed. And they begin to erode our energy, our passion, our drive, our focus from the inside out. So we're going to address these one at a time and talk about some disciplines to help us not fall into these traps of mediocrity. The first one is aimlessness. Now, we're all professionals. If I ask you, you could probably list a handful of projects you're accountable for right now. A handful of tasks that you know you need to get done, things you need to follow up on. Aimlessness doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. We all know what we're doing. The problem is we often lose track of where we're going in the midst of doing what we're doing. By way of illustrating this, if you give me a bow and an arrow and you send me out into a field and you tell me somewhere in this field is a target, but I'm going to blindfold you and I'm going to spin you around a couple of times and I want you to try to hit the target with the bow and the arrow. How likely am I to hit the target? Not very likely, right? By trial and error, I might eventually hit it, but I think a more meaningful question is this. How gratifying will it be when I finally accidentally hit the target? Not very gratifying. Why? Because there's little gratification that comes as the result of accidental success. Now, I'll take that over accidental failure, of course, right? But we are wired as humans to derive meaning and a sense of purpose from the work that we do. And there's little gratification that comes as a result of work that's not sourced in intent and purpose. So we have to have a clear sense of what it is we're trying to do. But it's not as clear, it's not as simple as let's just focus on the problem and solve it. By way of illustrating this, let me utter the actual most terrifying words ever uttered by a human being. Let me show you a magic trick I just learned, okay? All right, I'm going to put 5 cards on the screen. I want everyone to choose one card and just focus on one card. And then when you have your card, just nod. Nod your head. Okay, good. I'm going to mind meld with you. All right, I'm going to pull the 5 cards off the screen. I'm going to shuffle them. And I'm going to put just 4 of those cards back up on the screen. How many people see your card? Nobody? One person? Greatest magic trick ever. Actually, these are 4 entirely different cards than the ones I put up the first time. Those of you who raise your hands, come see me after. I have something I can refer you to. It's fine. Why does this trick work? It works because I gave you a problem to solve. And you performed brilliantly, with a few exceptions. You performed brilliantly on the problem that I gave you, but in so doing, you ignored the context for the problem. And when you ignored the context for the problem, when the context shifted, you didn't notice, right? Because you were so fixated on the problem. This happens all the time with companies that I'm working with. They perform very effectively in solving problems and doing projects, but the context has shifted around them. So they get to the end of the project and the work they've been doing is no longer relevant to the larger cultural So how do we avoid this? We have to define our through line. We have to define what we could also call our productive passion. This is the thing that ties together all of our work. It provides context for our work. You can even say it's the deeper why of our lives and of our organization. Why do you exist? What is the deeper problem you're trying to solve? What is the why behind the what of what you do on a daily basis? In the course of my research for my new book, I found the story of this guy. Does anyone know who this is, by the way? Impressed. Curtis Martin. Curtis Martin, former NFL running back, was recently inducted a couple years ago into the NFL Hall of Fame. Probably one of the greatest running backs of all time, or at least in recent memory. And then Curtis Martin was getting up to give his Hall of Fame induction speech at the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. And all the football greats are gathered in the room, and you can just smell the testosterone. You've got all these football greats, all these pundits are in the room. And Curtis Martin gets up to give his Hall of Fame induction speech, and some of the first words out of his mouth were these. I never was a football fan. I wasn't the type of guy to watch football. I can probably count on one hand how many football games I've watched from beginning to end in my lifetime. Here's a guy getting up to receive an award for being one of the greatest football players of all time, basically saying, not really a fan of the game, right? Curtis Martin went on to explain the reason he began playing football at all was because he grew up in kind of a troubled home, a broken home. Grew up on the streets, got into trouble when he was a youth. His mom, who was a single mom, pushed him into football as a way to keep him out of trouble, give him a chance to take out his aggression. He found out he was pretty good, right? Obviously. So he played high school football, he played college football. At the end of his college career, on NFL draft day, this is the day, by the way, that every college football player is dreaming of. NFL draft day, his family's gathered around, some friends are gathered around. He gets that call, that fateful call from Coach Parcells of the New England Patriots, who says, Curtis, we'd like to know if you'd like to be a New England Patriot. Curtis Martin replied, yes, Coach, yes, I'd like that very much, thank you. Click, turned around to his family and said, oh my gosh, I do not want to play football. On NFL draft day. One of the people present that day was a guy named Leroy Joseph, and he was a family friend. He said, hold on a minute, Curtis, hold on. You know all those people that you've always said you'd like to help if you had the chance? You know all those children from broken homes, all of those single moms who are out there just struggling to try to make it happen? Those people you've always said you wanted to help if you had a platform. What if football is your platform to be able to help all of those people? Curtis Martin went on to explain that became his connection to the game of football. He showed up before everybody else, he left after everybody else. He put more of himself into the game on the field than any of his teammates. Ask anyone who coached him or played with him and they'll tell you it's true. Not because he loved the game of football. Not because he loved the tasks he was doing. He says he boxes now for exercise because he hates to run so much. This is an NFL Hall of Fame running back who hates to run, right? He said that he put that much of himself into the game because he had something deeper he was trying to do. There was something that was a productive passion for him, funneling resources to help children who had been in circumstances like his. Curtis Martin had tapped his productive passion. So my question for you would be this: what is that for you, for your organization? What outcome are you committed to? Not what projects are you doing, not what tasks are you doing, not what problems are you trying to solve in the near term, but what is the outcome that you're committed to? And how can that provide better context for all of the work, all of the projects that you're doing? And by the way, for those of you who lead other people, how many of you have people who report up through you? Okay, this is one of the biggest problems that I see in organizations. It's a dynamic I call dissonance. We're not going to talk about it today, but it's a break between the why and the what. It's when people in your organization don't have an understanding of how their daily tasks and accountability flows up into the deeper why of the organization. When that break occurs, it's like an iceberg that drifts out to sea. And people fill that gap with a vacuum, with a story of their own. And it will eventually create a divide within your organization. So it's important to regularly contextualize the why of your work. Make sure that we understand how what we're doing flows up into the outcome we're committed to. And that's how we counter aimlessness. Right? The second deadly sin is boredom. Boredom. Now most of us would say, I'm not bored. I have a lot to do. But there's a dynamic that I call busy boredom. And there's a group of people I call the busily bored. Why do I call them the busily bored? Because the moment there's a gap, just a momentary lull in any kind of external stimulation, what happens? Phone comes out. And what are they doing? They're looking for something out there to stimulate them, something out there to engage engage them. They get bored in the meeting, no problem. I've got espn.com on my phone, right? Oh, I get bored in the meeting, no problem. I can surf my email and I can see if there's something that's more deserving of my time. This is a group that I call the busily bored. And it's primarily sourced in this thing that I call the ping. And the ping is this perpetual pinprick in my gut that says something like, you should go check your email right now. Or you should go check your Twitter feed right now. You should go check your phone because maybe the President of the United States is calling you with a national security crisis. Right? That's the level of urgency the ping delivers. And the ping has a life philosophy for you and for me, by the way. The life philosophy of the ping is something out there might be more important than what's in front of you. Something out there might be more important than what's in front of you. And it has us living in this state that Linda Stone calls continuous partial attention. Meaning I'm always kind of here, but I'm always kind of somewhere else at the same time. And do you think we can do our best work that way? No, of course not. Of course we can't, but we try. We certainly try. How many of you have checked your work email outside of work hours at some point in the last week? It's laughable. I mean, it's not even a question, right? How many of you have checked your email since I started my presentation? Let's be a little more vulnerable, right? It's everything I can do not to go grab my phone right now, pull it out, and fire up my email client. Why? Why? Because of the ping. How many of you get that phantom buzzing thing in your leg where you think your phone is ringing but it's not? You know what I'm talking about? Your phone's across. We are telekinetically connected to our technology. This is a problem. It's a problem. By way of illustrating this, productivity writer Merlin Mann calculated that if you check your email or break your focus in any way every 5 minutes over the course of an average workday, and just by the way, every 5 minutes, now most of us get distracted every 5 seconds, but let's say every 5 minutes over the course of an average workday, you will check your email in an average work year 24,000 times. 24,000 times. What do we do other than breathe? 24,000 times a year, right? Well, maybe we should check their email now. So I took this a step further, and I calculated in my first book, The Accidental Creative, I calculated that if we do that over the course of an average year, let's say it takes us 10 seconds to regain our depth of focus. Just 10 seconds. Over the course of an average year, you will spend 66.6 hours not doing anything about your email, not going into your email, just glancing to see if something out there is more important than what's in front of you. 66.6 hours. Now, I've done a couple of things here. First of all, 666 for email is evil. There you go. You're welcome. But second of all, how many of us struggle to find the time and the focus to do our most important work? I know I do. I know I do. And yet, I find no problem with dividing up my attention 10 seconds at a time and giving it away to the ping. Giving away to this voice that tells me something out there might be more important than what's in front of me. We have to learn to focus. We have to learn to be present. We have to learn to surround our problems, to stay with problems, to ask better questions, to use our full mental capability. We are living divided, and we are not bringing the best of who we are to what we do. So how do we do this? We have to be fiercely curious, which means we have to ask better questions. It means we have to be explorers of our world and then use that in the work that we're doing. But many of us are less than purposeful about the kinds of things we allow into our minds. Less than purposeful about the kinds of information that we absorb. So we have to, first of all, define our list. Your list, this is a story that came out of my research for the new book, sourced in the story of Rosanne Cash, the daughter of the legendary country music icon Johnny Cash, one of my musical heroes. And Johnny Cash was talking to Rosanne Cash when she was younger, and he said, hey, so, tell me about the kind of music you're listening to. And he started quizzing her about some of these country music greats, some of the canon of country music, as he would call it. And she was clueless. She didn't know what he was talking about. So here's this country music icon who's quizzing his daughter. She had no idea what he was talking about. So he said, hold on, stay right here. He goes across the room, picks up a piece of paper, starts writing. He comes back over to her, hands her the piece of paper and says, here, this is your education. And it was a list of country songs. It was a list of the songs that he deemed to be the most important songs that she should learn if she's going to have an educated understanding of the roots of country music. Well, I think for any of us who do what we do, there's probably a list that exists. A canon, if you will, of materials that we should be intimately familiar with. A canon that we should be diving into, studying, savoring, or Stephen Sample calls it communing with great minds on a regular basis. So what would be on your list? And where are you in your life dedicating time to communing with great minds, to sharpening yourself, to exploring problems that may not be squarely in the middle of your industry, but that can be gleaned from to apply to the problems you're trying to solve? We all know this. We all know this. But it's not what you know, it's what you do that matters. Action defines reality, not knowledge. So where in your life are you dedicating time to sharpen your mind and commune with other great minds? Okay? The second strategy is we need to surround problems. We need to stay with problems. We need to ask better questions. What does that mean? Well, it means that we need to be purposeful about our creative process, purposeful about our curiosity. So creativity looks like this. You've got a problem, sits in the center of your world. You've got lots of bits of stimuli, data, other problems you've solved, things you've seen, experiences you've had, and they live in the periphery around that problem. The creative process is the process of intentionally pushing out into that stimuli until you begin to see connecting points emerging between them. Steve Jobs once famously quipped, creativity is just connecting things. Stephen Johnson calls this process, borrowing from evolutionary biology, calls it exploring the adjacent possible. It's pushing out into those uncomfortable places where ideas and value resides. And often the brilliant idea or insight we're looking for lives far outside of the place we would look if we just hover close to the middle. But when we're busily bored, we hover close to the middle. We look for the next thing. We're always seeking inspiration and stimulus in the periphery of the problem. We're not pushing out into those uncomfortable places. Now this process has 5 steps. The first step is you define the problem. It's hard to solve a problem you haven't defined. The second step is you explore options, plural. The third step is you choose the best option, hopefully. The fourth step is you execute as in you do it, not as in you kill someone, usually. And then fifth is you rinse and repeat, meaning that this is an iterative process. You're constantly defining problems, exploring lots of options, choosing one, acting on it, observing, redefining the problem. This is creativity 101, and I want to point something out. This is obvious, okay? For professionals like people in this room, this is obvious. I could have given any one of you a napkin in 3 minutes. You could have come up and given this presentation. Okay? The reason I put this up is to show you how we actually approach problems when we're under pressure. There are 4 steps. We panic about the problem. We explore the first option. We choose that option, and we execute. This is what we do. We hover close to the middle. And in so doing, we sacrifice the value of the ideas we have to offer. And when it happens, we sometimes end up with some very interesting ideas. Okay? DVD rewinder, thank you. This is going to be very helpful. Yes, thank you. Or this guy, I'm not sure what problem he's solving, but he's doing it in a very novel way, certainly. Reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, which is this. If you can play guitar and harmonica at the same time, like Bob Dylan or Neil Young, you're a genius. You'll make that extra bit of effort to strap some cymbals through these, and suddenly people want to get the hell away from you. All right? And I think we've all seen those ideas that make us feel that way. We want to get the hell away from them because they're not the result of a well-informed, curious, creative process. So we have to stay with problems. We have to surround problems very intentionally. All right? So how do we do that? We have to ask better questions. We have to utilize what I call the 4 A's. The 4 A's are 4 tools that we can use to help us surround problems more effectively. Assumptions. Fireworks make my feet fuzzy. What am I assuming to be true? What am I assuming to be false in this scenario? Aspirations. What is the ideal end state of this project? What is the outcome we're committed to? And how can we use that to establish milestones to measure our progress, or smaller creative problems that we can solve, smaller challenges that we can wrap our mind around? Affinities. Where have I seen this before? Powerful question, by the way, to ask when you're trying to solve a creative problem. Where have I seen something like this before? Or who in another industry has solved something similar? And how can I apply those learnings to the problem I'm solving? And then attributes. What are the core elements of the problem? What are the specific attributes against which I can apply creative thought? Okay, so here's the challenge I have for you. Where am I busily bored in my life and in my work? Where do I find myself driven to distraction at a moment's notice when there's a lull of activity? How can I stay more focused? How can I ask better questions? Define your list. Develop this amazing tool that's between your ears, your mind. Spend time marinating on the great thoughts of people throughout history. Sharpen your mind, and then use that in application to your work. All right, the third deadly sin is comfort. This is when we begin to fall into a state of stasis because we prefer comfort over the discomfort that's required to do great work. You cannot pursue comfort and great work simultaneously. They are mutually exclusive objectives. Now, you might experience comfort on your path to doing great work, that's fine. I mean, we're not sitting in intentionally spiky chairs right now just because we want to be uncomfortable. I refuse to be comfortable. No, that's silly, right? But you cannot make comfort and great work simultaneous objectives. At some point, those who build a body of work, a delta that they can point to with pride that reflects them, are those who choose to do the right thing even when it's the uncomfortable thing. Which means what? Which means committing to continuous growth and innovation. Now, we love to talk about this with our companies. We need to innovate. We need to think of something new. Just make sure it's kind of close to the middle and make sure that our shareholders are happy, right? We love talking about innovation corporately, but I'm talking about personal innovation. I'm talking about personal growth. I'm talking about what you're doing to push yourself into uncomfortable places so that you're better equipped to deal with the opportunities that are coming your way tomorrow. Not just to take advantage of them, but to even be able to spot them. So growth looks something like this. This is one representation of a growth curve. You've got a slow start, followed by a steep growth of effectiveness as you develop your skills, and then an eventual slowing of effectiveness. And this is indicative of a lot of things. It may be indicative of population growth, product life cycle, or growth in learning a new skill. So let's say, for example, that you want to learn how to play guitar. Does anybody play guitar in the room, by the way? Oh, very enthusiastic, yes. Looks like it's you and me, brother. Okay, we're the only ones in the room. All right, so you want to learn how to play guitar. What's the first thing that happens? You hear Eric Clapton playing on the radio, and you think, I can do that, right? So you go out and you buy a $3,500 guitar, and it sits in the closet for 6 months. But that's a first step. It's an important first step. It's what I call discovery. Discovery is when your antennae are up and you're paying attention to your environment. You think, this is something I need to learn. This is something I need to do. But at some point, if you really want to learn how to play guitar, it's not going to be sufficient to have that guitar sitting in the closet. You have to actually pull it out and do something. You have to start learning how to play chords. And the way that you typically do that, or you learn any other skill, is through imitation or emulation. You're imitating somebody else. So that's why when you walk past a guitar store, you hear dun, 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 right? These are people who are imitating. They're building their platform of expression. They're annoyingly imitating, but that's what they're doing. They're learning how to play by imitating somebody else who's already been there before them. And many of you probably, when you came into your industry or into your organization, you learned how to do your job by watching your manager. Hopefully they were healthy and not dysfunctional, right? You were watching your manager and figuring out how to do what you do by watching them. But at some point, it becomes insufficient to imitate. At some point, you have to diverge. At some point, you have to begin taking strategic risks. You have to begin sailing perpendicular to the shoreline, finding your own voice, developing your own style, your own thoughts. And this is the highly productive part for many companies and organizations, is when they diverge. But at some point, inevitably, we all hit a point of crisis, which is when we begin to experience diminishing returns on our effort. What we used to do is no longer sufficient to meet today's demands, to meet today's marketplace, today's opportunities. And so we have a couple of things that we can do at this point of crisis, when we become stagnant, we're settling medias opus. A couple of things we can do. We can start a new curve, meaning we have to develop some new skills, we have to build some new muscles, we have to try some new things, which is eminently uncomfortable. It is. Right? Or we can begin to decline down the backside of the hill, because if we're not growing, ultimately we're dying. Growth is important because of uncertainty. You don't know what's coming your way in the market 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. That's why growth is so important. And on a personal level as well, that's why it's important. Because you don't know what you're going to have to be able to do in a couple of years. So you have to commit to continuous growth. So there are some specific things required of us in these phases. Discovery requires curiosity, as we talked about. Keeping our antenna out and paying attention to our environment. Noticing patterns and learning to think systemically and synthesize. Because we have feelers out in lots of different places because we're curious and we can synthesize patterns in culture. Imitation requires good old-fashioned grit. It's not fun. It's not fun to learn how to play guitar. It hurts your fingers for a while, but you have to push through it. My son's learning right now, and he's like, Dad, it hurts so bad. I say, shut up and keep playing, right? Because I know he has to push through the bar. I don't say shut up to my son, by the way. I know I've said that twice now. I really don't do that. Divergence requires courage. The willingness to take strategic and measured risk. Not foolish risk, strategic and measured risk. Firing bullets and cannonballs in Jim Collins' parlance. And then, crisis requires humility. The willingness to admit maybe what I've been doing and maybe what we've been doing all along is no longer sufficient. And maybe we need to risk looking like fools for a while in order to develop some new muscles. Maybe we'll have to go through a season of incompetence in order to get to the next place. But when we do, we'll be stronger because we're layering those new skills on top of what we're already doing. So the question that I have for you is, A, where are you in these stages of your life, of your career right now? And what new skills do you need to learn in order to continue growing? Because if you're not growing, you're dying. Right? The next deadly sin is delusion, which means living with a false sense of self. And this isn't just for individuals, it's for companies as well. How many of you would admit that you watch the television program known as American Idol? Okay, 3 of us, perfect. My family does too, but in truth, we only really watch maybe the first 5 or 6 episodes of every season. Why do we only watch the first 5 or 6 episodes of every season? Because that's when the parade of freaks comes across the stage, right? That's the audition phase. And inevitably, you have somebody who gets up on stage and they're presenting themselves to the judges, and they say, my name is Bob, I'm from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and my mom told me I'm the greatest singer since Frank Sinatra, and I'm going to be singing Carry On My Wayward Son, right? And then Bob proceeds to sing, and Bob is terrible, with a capital T. The judges are rolling around on the floor, they can't believe themselves, the judges collect themselves, they say, Bob, I'm sure you're probably good at something, but singing is not your thing. And what's Bob's response? What do you mean? What are you talking about? My mom told me I'm the greatest singer since Frank Sinatra. All of my friends love me at the Broken Spoke when I sing karaoke, right? Bob is living under the specter of delusion. Bob is never going to be effective as long as he continues pouring himself into something he's not naturally good at. But there are many narratives in the marketplace that tell us if you want to be really valuable, this is what you have to do. I was speaking yesterday with the Global Vice Chair Saatchi & Saatchi, Richard Heitner, we were chatting on the phone, and he was talking about how in our culture, we have this narrative that tells us we have to be the top dog. We have to be an A, or what he calls them accountables, right? We have to be the top dog, the CEO, the person running the show. He said many people are equipped to be the number 2. That's really their skill set. They're really great at being the person who's the connector, the person who's offering unfettered feedback to the number 1. That's really their gift set. But culturally, we reward people who become number 1s. And he said he's seen this over the years at Saatchi over and over and over again. You have this global advertising conglomerate, right? That people feel like the only way for them to advance in their career is to get to the top, to get to where they're running things. But often they're not equipped for that. That's not what they're really equipped for. They're living under the specter of delusion, this false narrative. So what we have to do is we have to be honest with ourselves about our skills, about what we're delivering to the marketplace, and we have to, and in many ways, we have to shun some of these cultural things that tell us we have to be something we're not. Because when we're living in a place where we're trying to be something we're not, it is inevitably a losing battle. We have to define our ethic. And our ethic is the set of words that defines how we will engage on a daily basis. It's a set of words that we choose to bring to the work that we're doing rather than allowing the work to define us. You can call them values, I prefer to call them an ethic, because I find that values are often wishy-washy. Instead, I choose to say, I am going to be energetic. When I leave this room, people will feel more energized than when I came in. I'm going to be honest, eminently honest, and I will speak the truth to people on my team. I'll speak the truth to my clients. I'll make sure that they understand that I'm always going to tell them the truth in any circumstance. This is part of the ethic that I bring to what I do. And as I do that, I discover more about who I am. I discover more about who we are collectively as an organization. Okay, so you have to be honest. Ask yourself, what am I doing right now that doesn't seem like me? What are we doing as an organization that doesn't seem like us? It's a great way to root out some of these self-deceptions, some of these delusions we might be living in. The next deadly sin is ego. Ego. Now, when we think of ego, we tend to think of the bombastic manager charging into the room, right? There's a dynamic that Jim Collins calls hubris born of success, which means, hey, by virtue of the fact that I am here, everything's going to be okay. Because look what I've done in the past, so just by showing up, everything's going to be fine. This is what we tend to think of as ego. It's the bombastic manager charging into the room saying, oh, kneel before Zod. Okay? But, and that certainly is one form of ego. But ego is any time that we become inflexible because we're putting ourselves ahead of the outcome, ahead of the productive passion, ahead of the thing we're trying to do. And so sometimes ego looks a little different. Sometimes ego looks like, oh, you're not going to listen to my idea? Oh, you're not going to value what I have to say in this meeting? Okay, I'm going to go hide in the corner. I'm going to take my marbles and go home. Playing the victim is a form of ego because we become inflexible. We put ourselves ahead of the outcome. And I've met many people, friends, who have spent days, weeks, months, years entrenched around this kind of self-protection. They become inflexible. And over time, they look back and they say, what did I do? I abdicated my contribution. All because I was trying to put myself ahead of the outcome. So what do? We have to be confidently adaptable. We have to move headstrong in the direction we think is right. We have to be willing to listen to disconfirming information. Who in your world can speak truth to you? One sign that ego is taken root is if there's nobody in your world who speaks things to you that you don't like. Who in your world speaks disconfirming truth? The confidence says I can get this right. Ego says I can do no wrong. Confidence says I'm valuable. Ego says I'm invaluable. These are fundamentally different mindsets. And over time, ego causes us to become inflexible. And we would rather drive the Titanic to the bottom of the ocean than admit we just hit an iceberg. And we, by the way, just to call it out, we celebrate stories of ego-laden leaders. We do. We like to celebrate the stories of people who had big egos, who led their company to the top. But I think we suffer from a kind of survivorship bias. We only tell the stories in which those leaders were successful, those ego-laden leaders were successful. We don't tell the stories where they tanked the company because they had built everything around their own ego. And I have talked to those people, and they exist in droves. We have to be careful not to let our ego cause us to put ourselves ahead of the world. So where have I become inflexible because of ego? Is a question we can answer. The next deadly sin is fear. Fear is when the perceived consequences of failure outweigh the perceived benefits of success. So we don't act. We don't try because we don't take strategic risk. There's a guy named Neil Fiore who does experiments with procrastination. He'll often take people into a room just like this, and he'll put a wood plank on the floor, 10 feet long, 6 inches wide. He'll ask them, could you walk the length of this plank if I asked you to? They say, of course, it's a wood plank on the floor. Why wouldn't I be able to do that? Of course. And they'll say, okay, great. Now imagine I take that wood plank and I suspend it 100 feet in the air between two buildings. Now, could you walk the length of that plank? They'll look at him like, no way, I'd have to be drunk. No way am I going to walk a wood plank 100 feet in the air. Well, what's changed about the technical skill required? Absolutely nothing. If you can do it on the ground, you can do it in the air. What's changed are the perceived consequences of failure, which in this case is plummeting to your death, so I kind of get it, right? But I would submit to you that many of us, we go through our days artificially escalating planks. Artificially escalating the perceived consequences of failure to the point that we don't act. We don't try things. We don't take strategic risk that leads to insight and innovation. We become paralyzed. You see, fear turns something innocuous into something terrifying. That's what fear does. If we're not careful to countermand it. So how do we countermand fear over time? Like my friend Brian says, fear is often the smell of opportunities. We have to notice fear and act squarely in its path. We have to find our voice, which means finding the thing that motivates us even in the face of fear. And how do we do this? We notice those areas where there are opportunities and then we act squarely in their direction. We follow the bouncing green arrows is what we do. So I want to give you a couple of points of traction to help you start thinking about this for you and for your company. Number one, what angers you? Right, now I'm not talking about road rage, by the way. Road rage, somebody cut me off on 71. That's not what I mean. What I'm talking about is compassionate anger. What fuels your fire? What problem do you see that makes you think, somebody needs to do something about that? What is that for you? A second way to think about it is, what makes you cry? Or guys, what makes you feel like you have something in your eye? Right? So I'm moved profoundly by the story of underdogs. I am. So I watched. Have you guys seen the movie Rudy before? Yeah, it's about the Notre Dame football player who shouldn't be able to play because he's tiny, but he makes the team. And true story, right? Kind of a little bit exaggerated, but a true story. Pretty amazing story. And so I've probably seen the movie 100 times. I'll be in the basement watching the movie. My wife will come downstairs. I've got lots of stuff in my eye. I'm sort of crying. Oh my goodness. And my wife says, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You've seen this movie 100 times. Why are you crying? You know what's going to happen. They're going to carry him off the field. You know this is going to happen. Why are you still crying?" You're like, "I know, but it's so beautiful. And he's so small, but he's playing so well. And they're going to carry him off." I'm profoundly moved by the stories of underdogs. And it fuels my work. When I go into organizations, when I speak to groups of people, it fuels my work because I want to help people who are underdogs in the marketplace overachieve. I want to help them be better than they think they can be. and achieve the impact that they don't believe maybe that they can have sometimes. It fuels my work. So what is that for you? What moves you emotionally that you can tap into as a source of inspiration even in the face of your fear? What have you mastered? What are you already good at? What's obvious to you that's not obvious to everybody else? We often think innovation has to be something new, something out there, something we never thought of. But often, our unique contribution, our voice, is the thing that we're really good at that other people say, well, I can never do that. And you say, well, no, that's obvious. No, it's obvious to you. It's not obvious to everybody. So what is that for you, for your organization? And then what gives you hope? What do you irrationally cling to? The world is falling, cats and dogs are living together, the sky is raining sulfur, but you're thinking, I think it's going to be okay, right? What is that for you? What is the thing that gives you irrational hope? And how can you use that as fuel for your fire in the face of fear? So, the question to help you countermand fear is this. Where am I paralyzed by a fear of ... Whatever that is, where are you afraid to act? Because that fear could be the smell of opportunity for you and for your organization. Not always, but it could be. The final deadly sin is guardedness. This is when we become closed off to others. It's when, as we become successful, we become more and more and more isolated. And I see this in organizations that become siloed off, and they refuse to talk to one another, and they even maybe hold a gun at one another because they're protecting their turf at the expense of the overall why of the organization. I've seen this in the lives of individuals. As they become more successful, they become more closed off. They have fewer people around them who will tell them the truth. I love how one of my favorite thinkers, Kierkegaard, talked about this dynamic. He said by forming a party, by melting into some group, we're not only conscious, but martyrdom. This is why fear of others dominates this world. No one dares to be a genuine self. Everyone is hiding in some kind of togetherness. And as we become more and more successful, it becomes easier to hide in some kind of togetherness. To make other people think we've got it all together. To make it think that we're right in the flow of what's going on. But the reality is we need other people to reflect back to us what they see. We have to stay connected to other people. We have to come out of hiding. We have to put our guns on the table. If people, every time they say something you don't like, if your first response is, right? I don't mean literally, although, these days it's kind of something that could really happen, but I don't mean literally, I'm saying figuratively. If they feel attacked by you when they speak truth to you, they're going to stop speaking truth to you. We have to put our guns on the table and let people speak to us what they want to say to us. And then we need mirrors in our life. So again, I ask you, who speaks truth to you in your life? Who is helping you get better at what you do? And we need circles of people to keep us inspired and talk about our work with. Circles of people to help us see the world through different lenses. If you only hang out with people who are exactly like you, who are facing the exact same problems that you're facing, then you're not going to venture out into those uncomfortable places where ideas might reside. We see this in the lives of creatives throughout history, that they had people around them who were from diverse backgrounds, diverse industries, and they would get together, they would talk about what they were facing and apply one another's insights to the work that they're doing. So who in your life plays that? Right. So, just by way of wrapping up, the last couple of minutes we have together, why? Why is this important? Right? Why is that? We're all doing fine. We all have jobs, obviously. We're all producing value. Our companies are probably doing fine. Yeah, we have important problems we're trying to solve, but why is this important specifically? Because bravery is what enables us ultimately to find our sweet spot. Bravery is what allows companies to find the unique arena in which they contribute the most value. Their sweet spot, the thing that they can do that nobody else can do because of their unique combination of productive passion, of skills, of experiences, of resources. Because they're able to spend their focus, assets, time, and energy against these problems. But you don't get there by default. You only get there by design. You only get there if you're living your life and structuring your organizations in such a way that you're spending those four levers, focus, assets, time, and energy, against a meaningful outcome that is uniquely contributive. I love how one of my other favorite thinkers, Thomas Merton, talked about this. He said, there can be an intense egoism in following everyone else. People are in a hurry to magnify themselves by imitating what is popular and too lazy to think of anything better. Hurry ruins saints as well as artists. They want quick success, and they are in such a hurry to get it, they cannot take time to be true to themselves. And when the madness is upon them, they argue that their very haste is a species of integrity. They want quick success, and they're in such a hurry to get it, they cannot take time to be true to madness is upon them, when the marketplace is screaming at them, when clients are calling them, when everything is frenetic, when they're busy and bored, they justify it as a species of integrity. But they're not taking the time to build disciplines into their life to prepare them for opportunities to operate in their sweet spot, to find their unique place. And so they compromise the value that they're able to contribute. They settle medias opus. That's why since the beginning of our company we've had a saying, cover bands don't change the world. The cover band is a band that plays other people's music. Cover bands fill clubs, cover bands make money, but at the end of the day, people won't sing in the music, not talking about the band. Because they were just imitating the value somebody else had already created. We don't need you to imitate somebody else's value. We need you to contribute the value you're uniquely capable of contributing. But it won't happen by default. It will only happen by design. So one final thought for you. About a decade ago, a friend of mine was leading a meeting. He asked kind of an out-of-the-blue question. He said, what do you think is the most valuable land in the world? That's a weird question. I don't know. I think we were looking at spreadsheets. He says, on page 10 of the spreadsheet, I don't know. What's the most valuable land in the world? He said, well, why don't you tell me what you think it is? So we started throwing out guesses. Oil fields in the Middle East. Okay. Gold mines in South Africa. Manhattan. The waterfront in Chicago. Downtown Paris. All right. So finally we said, okay, it's getting old. Why don't you tell us, what is the most valuable land in the world? He said, my opinion, I think the most valuable land in the world is a graveyard. He said, yeah, because in the graveyard are buried all of the unexecuted ideas, all of the unlaunched businesses, all of the untaken risks, all of the unwritten novels, all of the unreconciled relationships, all of the things that people carried around inside of them, all those little intuitive hunches. They say, yeah, I probably should do this. This is probably a good step for me. This is probably something this is probably a risk I should take. This is probably something I should launch, something I should do. But they thought, yeah, I'll get around to that tomorrow. And they pushed it, and they pushed it, and they pushed it into the future. Until one day they reached the bookend of their life, and all of that value was buried with them, dead in the ground, never to be seen by human eyes. The death rate is hovering right around 100%. So that day I went back to my office and I took out an index card and I wrote 2 words on the index card and I put them on the wall of my office. I wrote them in my notebook and I used them really to lead my team over the course of the next several years. This has really been the defining ethic of my life, and those 2 words that I wrote were die empty. Because I want to know when I reach the end of my life, the bookend of my life, I want to know that I'm not taking my best work to the grave with me, that I'm not keeping it inside of me, that I've done everything I can on a daily basis to use my focus, assets, time, and energy to build a body of work over time that I can be proud of, to build a delta I can point to and say, yes, that represents me. That represents the best of who I am, the best of what I care about. Now, I didn't leave that stuff inside of me. I didn't allow aimlessness, boredom, comfort, delusion, ego, fear, and guardedness to rob me of that contribution. Instead, I was intentional and diligent about building my life to get that value out of me every day. So, friends, be intentional, be disciplined, be brave in confronting the 7 deadly sins. If you are, then someday in the far distant future, when you lay your head down for the last time, you won't have gotten to do everything. None of us get that. None of us get to do everything. I hope I have more dreams, hopes, and ambitions in me when I die than I had the day before, but I will die empty of regret about where I spent my focus, assets, time, and energy. So if you were diligent and disciplined, when you lay your head down for the last time, you lay your head down empty of regret, but full of satisfaction for a life.